Hello and welcome to our YouTube channel. What does this data say? I'm Ajay Prakash. When Narendra Modi entered office in 2014, he sold a dream of governance so efficient, so transparent, so modern that India would finally break free from its bureaucratic chains. He called it minimum government and maximum governance. But 11 years later, what critics, analysts, former civil servants, global governance indices, and official data all point to is the opposite. Maximum government, a bloated PMO, and an oversized cabinet. Minimum governance, institutions are weakened, ministers are silenced. And maximum misgovernance, crisis management, farmers distressed, inflation is high, diplomacy is confused. Maximum image building on the other side. Announcements replace action, photos replace policy. This episode is about how India is cracking system by system under a governance model built around one office, one man, and one narrative. The Prime Minister's office was once meant to be a lean advisory body, but under Modi, the PMO has transformed into a massive, opaque, centralized super government. To understand why India's governance has collapsed, we must look at how the PMO made decisions and how it ran away from accountability. Have a look at some instances. The demonetization of 2016, shock, chaos, and zero accountability. One of the largest monetary shocks in global history, RBI data later revealed that 99.31% of the currency returned back. The PMO never took responsibility, and the Prime Minister disappeared for days, leaving the country confused and panicked. Then the sudden lockdown of 2020, a humanitarian crisis which was created by poor planning. Announced with only 4 hours' notice, millions of migrant workers were stranded, no transport plan, no food plan, no coordination. The PMO announced a lockdown but offered no administrative blueprint. The mismanagement continued in the second wave of COVID as well. Hospitals collapsed, oxygen shortages, crematoriums were overflowing. The PMO focused on election rallies, Kumbh Mela optics, and image building instead of preparation. The midnight GST rollout of 2017. It was launched with theatrics instead of preparation. GST rates changed over 100 times since then. Small businesses have suffered immense compliance burden. More recently, the Jagdeep Dhankar incident. Dhankar reportedly was sidelined with tensions that were visible. It raises questions of autonomy and respect for constitutional offices. And now the Sanchar Sathi U turn, a policy that was pushed aggressively, then withdrawn quietly after a massive backlash. Another example of policy making without consultation or planning. And what we are going through these days is the Indigo meltdown. Thousands of passengers remain stranded. Communication has been a total failure. The aviation ministry is unprepared and rather absconding. The Prime Minister's office has taken no responsibility while chaos has unfolded across all major airports in the country. This is not minimum government. This is maximum PMO, minimum planning, zero accountability. Now let's look at the official data proving that PMO is indeed bloated and centralized. The total number of personnel in Prime Minister's office today is 301. This is not a small number by any account. These numbers have been picked up from the Prime Minister's office website. The number of officers on special duty, well, that count has not been given. It would have been interesting to note how many of the people have been inducted into the Prime Minister's office bypassing the normal bureaucratic system. The size of the Council of Ministers in 2014, it started with a total of 45 ministers, in which 23 were cabinet ministers. Modi had promised minimum government at that time. But later, he had to give in to political pressure. Today, in 2024, the total number of ministers is 72, out of which 30 are cabinet ministers. We are back to the old model of governance. Modi ji has not been able to cut down the number of ministries or departments under him. In fact, the number has gone up by 2 from 56 to 58 in the last 10 years. So India is not collapsing, but it is cracking one system at a time. Electoral trust is weakening, farmers are sinking, inflation is crushing households, communication failures during crisis show internal collapse. Foreign policy has become a very focused photo opportunity. Ministries are paralyzed, and the PMO's centralization ensures no one else can lead when the crisis erupts. Let us examine each crack. Crack number one: electoral trust is eroding. Electoral roll saw a large unexplained revisions in multiple states. Former chief election commissioners and independent observers raised concerns about the opaque decision making, voter list deletions without clear justification, decline in consultation, and declining public trust. Even the perception of manipulation, it damages democracy. Crack 2: the farmers' distress. The broken promises. Modi promised to double farmers' income by 2022. Official NSS data shows this did not happen. Farmers today face stagnant incomes, rising input costs, falling real purchasing power, weak MSP enforcement, lack of crop diversification strategy. This is a national failure driven entirely by the PMO dominance and poor ministerial autonomy. Crack 3: food inflation. Persistent inflation is crushing household savings. The PMO's economic mismanagement includes failure to stabilize food supply chain, late response to pricing spikes, zero accountability, reliance on free ration distribution. When 80 crore people depend on free food, it means the economic model is failing. And then let's talk about Operation Sindoor, the crack number 4. The operation exposed conflicting statements, no unified spokesperson, and delayed clarity. This happened because ministries cannot act without PMO clearance. Government freezes when one office controls everything. Crack 5, I'll talk a little bit more on this, the foreign policy missteps. India's foreign policy since 2014 is widely criticized for privileging spectacle over strategy, which has eroded consistency, reduced room for maneuver, and dented India's image as a steady, principled actor. Analysts note that the neighborhood first push has morphed into interventionist, leader centric diplomacy that backfired in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. India's heavy bet on Sheikh Hasina, despite rising domestic resentment and authoritarian drift, left New Delhi sidelined after her fall and fed anti India sentiment, including India out style rhetoric in the region. In the Maldives, the election of Mohammad Muizzu on an explicitly India out platform symbolized a visible loss of goodwill around India's periphery. Foreign policy commentators argue that Modi's government often overplays proximity to great powers, then scrambles to rebalance, undermining the image of a strategic autonomy. The embrace of the US and Quad, followed by renewed high profile outreach to Russia during the Ukraine war, has drawn criticism for creating bad optics that satisfy neither Moscow nor Western powers and complicate India's claim to moral high ground. Studies of the last decade describe a diplomacy driven by leader centric branding and photo ops, where headline visits and mega event outstrip substantive, predictable positions. Critics point out Operation Sindoor ceasefire being first announced by the US President, not by New Delhi, as emblematic of diminished agency and the perception that India is reactive, not agenda setting in crisis. Photo ops replaced negotiations, speeches replaced strategy, diplomacy became drama. Crack number 6 are invisible ministers. Even though Modi has 72 ministers, the public sees none during crisis. Because the PMO scripts everything, ministers fear contradicting the PM, no one has autonomy, all public communication is centralized. Observers across the security and economic establishment argue that Narendra Modi runs an intensely centralized system in which key ministers often appear sidelined on major decisions. During Balakot, Galwan, and Operation Sindoor, the political narrative and operational credit were consistently projected upwards to the Prime Minister's leadership, with Rajnath Singh largely reduced to post facto endorsement rather than visible autonomous crisis manager. In economic policy, reports describe the Prime Minister's office as effectively running the finance ministry, with Nirmala Sitaraman criticized as a rubber stamp finance minister who reads out a PMO driven line rather than shaping strategy herself. So, what you see is paralysis at the top, a government that cannot govern, parliamentary functioning, media engagement, and governance inequality. Again, parliamentary functioning, media engagement, and governance quality indicators together show a worrying drift over Modi's decade in power. Parliament's role is shrinking. Studies of the 16th and 17th Lok Sabha show fewer sitting days, falling productivity, and sharp rise in laws passed with little debate or committee scrutiny, reinforcing executive dominance. Analysts note frequent disruptions, bypassing of committees, and budgets rushed through with minimal discussion as signs that Parliament's deliberative core has weakened. And then the famous no press conferences by Narendra Modi. Narendra Modi has effectively not held an open, unscripted press conference as a prime minister, relying instead on one way speeches and tightly managed interviews with friendly outlets. Commentators link this to an aversion to tough questioning and a desire to control narrative rather than any admitted inferiority complex, attributing psychological motives remains speculative and not evidence based. The governance indicators of the Modi government are on the downslide. The World Bank's Worldwide Governance Indicators database shows India scores on voice and accountability, government effectiveness, regulatory quality, and rule of law either stagnating or declining in the second half of the 2010s and into the early 2020s. So, what was promised? Minimum government, maximum governance. What India got? Maximum government, minimum governance, maximum misgovernance. A PMO that acts without accountability, ministers who remain invisible, policies announced without planning and rolled back without explanation, institutions cracking, a governance model that prioritizes the Prime Minister's image over the nation's stability. I think India deserves better. I would like to hear from all of you. Thank you for watching. I am Ajay Prakash.